The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan mountains as Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen adjusted her rifle scope one final time. 3 miles below, her SEAL team moved like ghosts through the rocky terrain, but Chen wasn't with them today. She had a different mission entirely. Chen lay perfectly still on the ridge overlooking the Panjshir Valley, her ghillie suit blending seamlessly with the weathered stones and sparse vegetation. Her Barrett M82 rifle rested on its bipod, the massive, 50-caliber weapon, capable of reaching targets at distances that would make most snipers nervous. But Chen wasn't most snipers. She was one of only 12 women to ever complete SEAL training, and the only one currently qualified as a designated marksman. Below, Alpha Team moved toward their target, a suspected Taliban stronghold built into the mountainside like a fortress from another era. The intelligence reports indicated the compound housed a high-value target, someone important enough to risk 8 of America's finest special operations soldiers on a direct assault. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez led the team through the narrow canyon that would take them to the compound's rear entrance. Behind him, 7 other SEALs moved with practiced precision, each man carrying enough firepower to level a small building. They had trained for this mission for 3 weeks, studying satellite photos and building mock-ups until they could navigate the compound blindfolded. Rodriguez keyed his radio, speaking in the calm, measured tone that had kept his men alive through 4 combat deployments. Overwatch, this is Alpha 1. We're approaching the secondary entrance. No movement detected. Chen's voice crackled through their earpieces, steady and reassuring. Alpha 1. Overwatch has you visual. Your route looks clear, but I'm seeing heat signatures inside the main building. Count 12, maybe 15 individuals. Copy that, Overwatch. We knew this wasn't going to be a ghost town. Rodriguez had earned his chief's anchor through 15 years of hard fighting, from the urban combat of Ramadi to the mountain warfare of Afghanistan. He had seen young SEALs freeze under fire and watched veterans make mistakes that cost lives, but his current team was different. These men had earned their tridents the hard way, and they trusted each other completely. Behind Rodriguez, Petty Officer Second Class Jake Thompson carried the team's breaching charges, each one precisely calculated to create an entry point without bringing down the entire structure. Thompson was 26 years old and had the kind of steady hands that made him invaluable when working with explosives. His teammates called him Demo, not just for his expertise, but for his uncanny ability to remain calm when surrounded by enough high explosives to crater a city block. The team's medic, Hospitalman Second Class David Kim, moved with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to navigate battlefields while carrying the weight of responsibility for his teammates' lives. Kim had saved more SEALs than he cared to count, working under fire to patch wounds and stabilize injured warriors until they could reach proper medical facilities. His medical kit contained everything from basic bandages to surgical tools, and his fellow SEALs knew that Kim's presence meant the difference between going home wounded or not going home at all. As they approached the compound, Rodriguez studied the ancient stone walls through his night vision goggles. The structure had probably stood for centuries, weathering countless storms and conflicts. Taliban forces had chosen it well. The compound offered commanding views of the surrounding valleys, while providing multiple escape routes through the network of caves that honeycombed the mountainside. Alpha Team, hold position. Rodriguez whispered into his radio. Overwatch, I need another sweep of the area. Something doesn't feel right. Chen pressed her eye to the scope, scanning the landscape with the patience that separated elite snipers from ordinary marksmen. She had been in position since midnight, moving into place under cover of darkness and remaining motionless for hours. Her body ached from the prolonged prone position, but discomfort was irrelevant when her teammates' lives depended on her vigilance. Alpha 1, I'm not seeing any external security. No roving patrols, no sentries. Either they're very confident or very careless. Rodriguez felt the familiar tingle of unease that had kept him alive through countless operations. Enemy fighters in Afghanistan had learned hard lessons about American special operations capabilities. They had adapted their tactics, becoming more sophisticated and more dangerous with each passing year. The absence of obvious security measures might indicate overconfidence, but it could just as easily suggest a trap. Thompson, how long for the breach charge? "30 seconds, Chief. Clean entry, minimal noise. Kim, you stay with the demo team until we secure the first floor. Ramirez, you and Jackson take the stairs. Martinez and Williams, you're with me on the main floor. Santos, you watch our 6. Each SEAL acknowledged the orders with a subtle hand signal. They had rehearsed these movements dozens of times, both in training facilities and in the Afghan mock-up they had constructed at their forward operating base. Every man knew his role, his backup assignments, and the emergency procedures that would guide their actions if the mission went sideways. Petty Officer First Class Carlos Ramirez checked his weapon one final time, ensuring the safety was off and a round was chambered. Ramirez had earned his reputation during urban combat operations in Iraq, where he had developed an almost supernatural ability to clear buildings quickly and efficiently. His teammates trusted him to handle the upper levels of the compound while they secured the ground floor. Next to Ramirez, Petty Officer Second Class Robert Jackson examined his breaching tools and flex cuffs. Jackson was the team's youngest member at 23, but he had already proven himself during operations in Syria and Yemen. His job was to secure any prisoners and gather intelligence materials, while Ramirez neutralized threats. The remaining 3 SEALs, Martinez, Williams, and Santos, formed the backbone of the team's assault element. Each man was a veteran of multiple combat deployments, and they moved with the coordinated precision that came from years of training and shared experiences under fire. As Thompson prepared his breaching charge, Chen continued her overwatch duties from the ridge 3 miles away. Her position had been carefully chosen to provide clear lines of sight to all possible escape routes from the compound. If any enemy fighters attempted to flee during the assault, they would find themselves in the crosshairs of one of the most accurate marksmen in the United States military. Chen had grown up in San Francisco, the daughter of immigrants who had built a successful restaurant business through decades of 18-hour workdays. Her parents had expected her to follow a traditional path: college, marriage, perhaps a career in business or medicine. Instead, she had shocked them by enlisting in the Navy immediately after high school graduation. The path to becoming a SEAL had been longer and more difficult for Chen than for her male counterparts. She had been required to prove herself again and again, demonstrating not just physical capability, but the mental toughness that defined special operations warriors. Some instructors had been openly skeptical, while others had subjected her to additional scrutiny that bordered on harassment. But Chen had persevered, driven by a determination that surprised even her. Her sniper training had begun almost by accident. During a routine training exercise, Chen had consistently outperformed her teammates on the rifle range, placing shots with mechanical precision at distances that challenged even experienced marksmen. Her instructors had recommended additional training, and Chen had embraced the opportunity to develop a skill set that would make her invaluable to SEAL teams around the world. Now, lying motionless on the Afghan ridge, Chen embodied the patience and precision that defined elite snipers. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate, and eliminating the minor tremors that could throw off a shot at extreme distance. Her rifle was perfectly zeroed, and she had calculated wind speed, air density, and temperature to ensure accuracy if called upon to engage targets. Below, Rodriguez gave the final signal to begin the assault. Thompson placed his breaching charge against the compound's rear door, a shaped charge designed to create a man-sized opening without excessive noise or structural damage. The explosive would punch through the heavy wooden door in milliseconds, allowing the team to enter before any defenders could react. "Overwatch, we're going in. Keep us covered." "Roger that, Alpha 1. I have your back." Thompson triggered the charge, and the night erupted in a brief flash of light and sound. The door disintegrated, and Alpha Team flowed through the breach like water through a broken dam. Their movements were synchronized and purposeful, each SEAL covering assigned sectors while advancing toward their objectives. Rodriguez entered first, his weapon raised and ready. The compound's interior was exactly as their intelligence reports had predicted: stone walls, narrow corridors, and thick wooden beams that had probably been installed centuries ago. But something was wrong. The building felt empty, as if the heat signatures Chen had detected had somehow vanished. "First floor, clear," Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with concentration. "Moving to secondary positions." Ramirez and Jackson had already reached the stone staircase that led to the upper level. The stairs were narrow and steep, forcing the SEALs to advance single file while maintaining fields of fire. Ramirez led the way, his weapon trained on the shadows above, while Jackson covered the rear and watched for threats from the main floor. Kim and Thompson established themselves near the entry point, ready to provide suppressive fire or medical assistance as needed. Both men monitored the radio traffic while scanning the compound for signs of hidden enemies or concealed weapons. As the team advanced deeper into the building, Chen maintained her vigilant overwatch from the ridge. Her scope swept continuously across the compound and surrounding terrain, searching for any indication of enemy movement. The absence of resistance was beginning to concern her. Taliban fighters rarely abandoned valuable positions without a fight, and the compound was too strategically important to leave undefended. Alpha 1, Overwatch. I'm seeing some disturbing patterns in the terrain around your position. The ground looks disturbed in several places, like someone's been digging. Rodriguez felt his stomach clench. Disturbed ground could indicate many things, but in Afghanistan, it usually meant one thing: improvised, explosive devices. The Taliban had become expert at creating elaborate booby trap systems, designed to channel enemy forces into carefully prepared kill zones. Copy that, Overwatch. We're seeing the same thing down here. Looks like we might be walking into something. The realization hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. The compound wasn't abandoned, it was bait. The Taliban had prepared this location as a trap, allowing American forces to enter before springing their ambush. The heat signatures Chen had detected were probably fighters positioned in concealed bunkers or hidden fighting positions, waiting for the optimal moment to open fire. All stations, Alpha 1. This is turning into a trap. Prepare for immediate extraction. But even as Rodriguez gave the order, he realized they might be too late. The compound's narrow corridors and limited exits made rapid escape nearly impossible, especially if enemy forces had positioned themselves to control the surrounding terrain. Alpha Team was skilled and experienced, but they were also vastly outnumbered in unfamiliar territory. Chen watched through her scope as muzzle flashes erupted from concealed positions around the compound. The Taliban had waited until the SEAL team was fully committed before revealing their presence. Now her teammates were trapped inside a stone fortress while enemy fighters emerged from spider holes and hidden bunkers like deadly phantoms. The first shots came from the north, where Chen spotted the distinctive flash of an RPG launcher. The rocket-propelled grenade streaked toward the compound's main entrance, designed to seal the SEALs inside, while follow-up fire eliminated any survivors. But Chen was already moving, shifting her rifle toward the threat while calculating range, wind, and target movement. Her first shot took the RPG gunner in the center of mass, the .50 caliber round, traveling at over 2,800 feet per second. At that velocity, the massive bullet carried enough kinetic energy to stop a charging rhinoceros. The Taliban fighter simply ceased to exist, his weapon clattering to the ground unfired. But Chen's intervention had revealed her position to the enemy forces, and now she faced a new problem. Taliban fighters were beginning to direct fire toward her ridge, forcing her to choose between maintaining her overwatch position and protecting herself from incoming rounds. Either choice carried enormous risks for her teammates trapped below. Rodriguez's voice crackled through her earpiece, strained but controlled. Overwatch, we're taking heavy fire from multiple directions. We need immediate support. Chen adjusted her position slightly, accepting the increased risk to maintain her fields of fire. Her teammates needed her now more than ever, and she would not abandon them. The Barrett rifle had an effective range of over a mile, and Chen intended to use every yard of that capability to keep Alpha Team alive. The battle for the compound had only just begun, and Chen already knew it would test every skill she had learned during her years as a Navy SEAL. But failure was not an option. Her teammates were counting on her, and she would not let them down. The compound shook as the first mortar round impacted against the eastern wall, sending chunks of ancient stone flying through the narrow corridors. Rodriguez pressed himself against the interior wall, feeling the vibration travel through the thick stones as dust cascaded from the ceiling above. The Taliban fighters had revealed the true scope of their ambush. and it was far more sophisticated than any of the SEALs had imagined. Alpha 2, report. Rodriguez called into his radio, struggling to hear Jackson's response over the increasing volume of gunfire outside. Upper level secure, but we've got movement in the caves behind us, Jackson replied, his voice tight with concentration. Looks like they've got tunnel access we didn't know about. The intelligence reports had mentioned the cave system, but American analysts had assumed the tunnels were natural formations used primarily for storage and shelter. Now it became clear that the Taliban had spent months, possibly years, converting those caves into an elaborate network of fighting positions and supply routes. They could move fighters and equipment throughout the mountainside without ever exposing themselves to aerial surveillance or satellite imagery. Chen watched the developing battle through her rifle scope, her trained eye picking out details that would be invisible to less experienced observers. The enemy forces were moving with discipline and coordination that indicated professional military training. These weren't village farmers with ancient AK-47 rifles. They were experienced fighters who understood small unit tactics and had prepared thoroughly for this engagement. Her second shot eliminated a Taliban machine gunner who had been setting up a PKM machine gun on a rocky outcropping 400 yards from the compound. The heavy, .50 caliber round arrived before the sound of Chen's rifle, giving the enemy no warning before their gunner simply vanished in a red mist. But for every target Chen eliminated, 2 more seemed to appear from the network of caves and hidden positions that surrounded the ancient fortress. Inside the compound, Thompson was working frantically to establish communications with their helicopter support. The team's original extraction plan had called for helicopter pickup from a landing zone half a mile from the compound, but that location was now under direct observation by enemy forces. Any helicopter attempting to land there would be destroyed before it could touch down. Overlord, this is Alpha 1. Thompson called into his radio, using the call sign for their mission commander back at the forward operating base. We are in contact with significant enemy forces and require immediate air support. Current position is not suitable for extraction. The response came back immediately, but it wasn't what any of the SEALs wanted to hear. Alpha 1, Overlord. Air support is 20 minutes out. Weather conditions have grounded our helicopters until further notice. You are directed to hold position and await further instructions. 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours. The Taliban fighters were closing their trap methodically, using their superior numbers and knowledge of the terrain to overwhelm the small SEAL team. Rodriguez realized that his men would need to break out of the compound and find a more defensible position if they hoped to survive until air support arrived. Kim had established a casualty collection point in what had once been the compound's main room, clearing debris and preparing medical supplies for wounded teammates. So far, Alpha Team had been lucky, several close calls but no serious injuries. But Kim knew from experience that luck was a finite resource in combat, and their current situation was deteriorating rapidly. Martinez and Williams had taken positions near the compound's main entrance, using the stone walls for cover while engaging targets of opportunity. Both men were experienced urban warfare specialists who understood how to maximize the defensive advantages offered by the ancient structure. But even thick stone walls couldn't protect them indefinitely from the volume of fire being directed toward their position. "Chief, we need to move," Martinez called out during a brief lull in the enemy fire. "They're maneuvering for a final assault, and we don't have enough ammunition for a sustained defense." Rodriguez knew Martinez was right, but their options were extremely limited. The compound sat on a narrow ledge with steep drops on 3 sides, and the cave network blocking their rear exit. Any movement would expose his team to concentrated fire from multiple directions, but staying in place meant certain death when the Taliban fighters completed their encirclement. Chen had been monitoring the radio traffic while continuing her precision fire on enemy positions. Her elevated position gave her a clear view of the Taliban battle plan, and she could see how they were positioning fighters to cut off all possible escape routes from the compound. The enemy commander was clearly experienced in mountain warfare, using the terrain and superior numbers to create an inescapable trap. But Chen also noticed something the Taliban fighters might not have considered. A narrow goat trail wound down the mountainside from a point roughly 500 yards east of the compound. The trail was barely visible, hidden by shadows and loose rock, but it offered a potential escape route if Alpha Team could reach it. The problem was that any movement toward the trail would require crossing open ground under direct enemy observation. Alpha 1, Overwatch. I have a possible escape route, but you'll need to move fast and stay low. There's a trail at your 2 o'clock, about 500 yards out. I can provide covering fire, but you'll be exposed for at least 3 minutes. Rodriguez considered the options quickly. 3 minutes in the open, against entrenched enemy positions, would normally be suicide for an 8-man team, but their current situation offered no good choices, only degrees of risk. Staying in the compound meant certain death when the Taliban fighters completed their assault preparations. Copy that, Overwatch. We're going to need every round you've got. Chen began calculating distances and windage for the shots she would need to make. The enemy fighters had positioned themselves throughout the canyon, taking advantage of natural cover and prepared fighting positions. Eliminating enough targets to give Alpha Team a fighting chance would require shooting at the absolute limits of her rifle's effective range while under return fire from multiple directions. Her third shot took out a Taliban sniper who had been trying to get an angle on her position from a cave entrance 800 yards away. The .50 caliber round punched through the sniper's chest and continued into the cave behind him, ricocheting off stone walls with a sound like thunder. But Chen's muzzle flash had been visible to other enemy fighters, and now several machine guns were traversing toward her position. Santos had been monitoring the rear entrance when the first Taliban fighters emerged from the tunnel system. The enemy had been moving through the caves for hours, positioning themselves for a coordinated assault from inside the compound itself. Santos opened fire immediately, his M4 carbine chattering on full automatic as he engaged multiple targets at close range. "Contact rear. They're inside the building," Santos shouted into his radio, falling back toward the main room while laying down suppressive fire. The situation had just become desperate. Taliban fighters were now attacking from both outside and inside the compound, using their tunnel network to bypass the SEALs' defensive positions. Rodriguez realized that his team had perhaps minutes before they were completely overrun by superior numbers attacking from multiple directions. Ramirez and Jackson were fighting their way back down the narrow staircase, engaging Taliban fighters who had emerged from hidden passages on the upper level. The ancient building had obviously been modified over the years, with concealed entrances and fighting positions built into its stone walls. American intelligence had completely underestimated the sophistication of the Taliban defensive preparations. "We need to move now," Rodriguez ordered, recognizing that delay would only make their situation worse. "Everybody out the front entrance." "Overwatch, we're coming your direction." Chen shifted her rifle toward the most dangerous enemy positions, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether any of her teammates survived. The Barrett rifle held only 10 rounds in its magazine, and she had already fired 3 shots. Every remaining round would need to count if Alpha Team was going to reach that goat trail alive. The compound's front entrance exploded outward as Thompson detonated a larger breaching charge, creating a wall of smoke and debris that would provide momentary concealment for the team's escape attempt. The 8 SEALs burst through the opening in a coordinated rush, each man responsible for a specific sector of fire while moving toward their designated escape route. Chen's 4th shot eliminated a machine gun team that had been positioned to cover the exact route Alpha Team needed to take. Her 5th shot took out an RPG gunner who was preparing to fire on the escaping SEALs. Each shot was perfectly placed, arriving exactly when and where it was needed most. But the enemy fire was intensifying, and Chen could see muzzle flashes from at least 20 different positions scattered throughout the canyon. Rodriguez led his team across the open ground in a series of tactical bounds, with half the team providing covering fire while the other half moved. It was a technique they had practiced thousands of times, but never under such intense enemy fire or across such difficult terrain. The loose rock and steep slopes made rapid movement nearly impossible, while Taliban fighters adjusted their aim to track the escaping Americans. Kim was helping Santos, who had taken a bullet through his left shoulder during the fighting inside the compound. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it limited Santos's mobility and forced Kim to divide his attention between navigation and medical care. Every step across the rocky terrain sent waves of pain through Santos's injured shoulder, but the tough SEAL grimly refused to slow down the team's escape. Williams stumbled as a Taliban bullet creased his helmet, the impact spinning him around and sending him tumbling down a loose scree slope. Martinez immediately moved to assist his teammate, grabbing Williams and helping him regain his footing despite the increasing volume of enemy fire around them. The two SEALs had served together for 3 years, and neither man would abandon the other, regardless of the personal risk involved. Chen's sixth shot interrupted a Taliban assault team that had been maneuvering to cut off the SEALs' escape route. The enemy fighters had been moving through a series of rocky outcroppings, using natural cover to advance undetected until they could open fire at point-blank range. Chen's perfectly timed intervention scattered the assault team and bought Alpha Team precious seconds to continue their movement toward the goat trail. But Chen's position on the ridge was becoming untenable. Taliban fighters had identified her location and were directing concentrated fire toward her hiding place. Heavy machine gun bullets were striking the rocks around her, sending chips of stone flying through the air like shrapnel. She had perhaps 1 or 2 more shots before enemy fire would force her to abandon her overwatch position. Thompson was bleeding from multiple shrapnel wounds caused by a mortar round that had exploded nearby, but the demolitions expert continued to move with his teammates despite his injuries. His equipment pack contained enough high explosives to level a city block, but none of those tools would help Alpha Team escape their current situation. What they needed was time and distance, both of which were rapidly running out. Ramirez had taken point for the team's movement, using his urban warfare experience to identify the safest route across the treacherous terrain. Behind him, Jackson provided security while monitoring their back trail for pursuing Taliban fighters. The enemy forces were definitely following, using their superior knowledge of the mountainside to maintain contact while avoiding Chen's rifle fire. Rodriguez checked his GPS receiver, confirming their progress toward the goat trail that might offer salvation. They had covered roughly half the distance, but the terrain was becoming more difficult with each step. The trail itself was still 300 yards away, and enemy fire was intensifying as more Taliban fighters joined the pursuit from their cave network. Chen made a critical decision, knowing it might cost her life but recognizing that her teammates needed every possible advantage. Instead of repositioning to protect herself from incoming fire, she remained in place and continued engaging enemy targets with mechanical precision. Her 7th shot eliminated a Taliban forward observer who had been directing mortar fire onto Alpha Team's escape route. The mortar rounds had been landing closer and closer to the fleeing SEALs, each explosion sending deadly fragments across the rocky slopes. By eliminating the forward observer, Chen had disrupted the enemy's ability to adjust their indirect fire. But she had also exposed herself to increased small arms fire from multiple directions. Alpha Team was now within 200 yards of the goat trail, but their movement had slowed considerably due to the difficult terrain and their mounting casualties. Santos was weakening from blood loss, despite Kim's field dressing of his shoulder wound. Williams was struggling with a concussion caused by the bullet impact on his helmet. Thompson's shrapnel wounds were bleeding steadily, leaving a trail that Taliban trackers could follow even in complete darkness. The enemy fighters were closing in from 3 directions, having used their tunnel network to position assault teams both ahead of and behind the escaping Americans. Rodriguez could see that his team was walking into another carefully prepared ambush. But they had no choice except to continue toward the trail and hope that Chen could provide enough covering fire to see them through. Chen's 8th shot stopped a Taliban machine gun team that had been setting up to enfilade the goat trail itself. The enemy fighters had obviously considered the possibility that American forces might use that escape route, and they had positioned themselves accordingly. Only Chen's intervention from 3 miles away prevented Alpha Team from walking directly into a lethal crossfire. But with only 2 rounds remaining in her rifle, Chen knew she was approaching the limit of what she could accomplish from her current position. The Taliban fighters were numerous, well-positioned, and increasingly aggressive in their pursuit of the American Special Operations Team. Unless something changed dramatically in the next few minutes, Alpha Team would be overwhelmed by superior numbers before they could reach safety. The goat trail beckoned ahead, a narrow thread of hope winding down the mountainside toward potential salvation. But between Alpha Team and that trail lay 200 yards of open ground, covered by enemy fighters who had spent years preparing for exactly this type of engagement. The next few minutes would determine whether 8 of America's finest warriors would make it home alive. Chen watched through her scope as Alpha Team approached the final stretch of open ground before the goat trail, her finger resting lightly on the Barrett's trigger. The Taliban fighters had positioned themselves perfectly to ambush her teammates, creating overlapping fields of fire that would turn the next 200 yards into a killing field. She had 2 rounds left, and at least 15 enemy fighters were visible from her position. The mathematics were simple and brutal. 2 bullets could not eliminate 15 targets, no matter how skilled the marksman. But Chen had not become one of the Navy's most elite snipers by accepting limitations. As she studied the enemy positions through her scope, her tactical mind began identifying opportunities that others might miss. The Taliban machine gun crews had positioned themselves in 2 primary groups, with supporting riflemen scattered between them. If Chen could eliminate the machine gunners with her remaining rounds, the riflemen would lose their ability to deliver sustained, accurate fire at long range. Alpha Team might be able to fight their way through individual fighters armed only with assault rifles. But there was another factor Chen had noticed during her hours of observation. Many of the Taliban fighting positions were located near unstable rock formations that had been weakened by years of weather and erosion. A .50 caliber bullet carried enough kinetic energy to trigger rock slides if it struck the right spot at the correct angle. Instead of targeting individual fighters, Chen could potentially eliminate entire groups by bringing down the stones that sheltered them. Rodriguez's voice crackled through her earpiece, strained but determined. "Overwatch. We're making our final push. Whatever you can do for us, we need it now." Chen had already identified her targets. The first shot would target a machine gun team positioned behind a precarious stone outcropping. The massive .50 caliber bullet would punch through their position and continue into the loose rock behind them, triggering a landslide that would eliminate not only the machine gunners, but also 3 riflemen positioned nearby. Her 9th shot struck exactly where she intended, and the result exceeded even her expectations. The heavy bullet shattered the keystone that had been supporting tons of loose rock above the Taliban position. The entire hillside seemed to shift and groan before tons of granite cascaded downward, burying 5 enemy fighters and their weapons under an avalanche of stone and debris. The psychological effect on the remaining Taliban fighters was immediate and profound. They had been confident in their superior numbers and defensive positions, but watching their comrades disappear under tons of rock triggered a primitive fear that transcended tactical training. Several fighters abandoned their positions entirely, fleeing toward the cave network rather than risk being caught in another rock slide. Alpha Team pressed their advantage immediately, with Rodriguez leading his men in a final sprint toward the goat trail. Santos was still bleeding from his shoulder wound, but adrenaline and determination carried him forward despite his weakening condition. Kim stayed close to the injured SEAL, ready to provide immediate medical assistance if Santos collapsed. Williams had recovered sufficiently from his concussion to maintain his position in the team's tactical formation, though his movements remained slightly unsteady. Thompson's shrapnel wounds continued to bleed, but the demolitions expert gritted his teeth and kept pace with his teammates. Neither man would allow personal injuries to endanger the team's escape. Chen tracked the remaining machine gun team through her scope, calculating the complex ballistics required for her final shot. The enemy fighters had learned from the fate of their comrades and had repositioned themselves away from unstable rock formations. But they had made a different mistake that Chen intended to exploit. Their new position offered excellent fields of fire toward the goat trail, but it was located near a cache of ammunition and explosives that the Taliban had stockpiled for their ambush. Chen could see wooden crates and metal containers stacked behind the machine gun position, almost certainly containing mortar rounds, RPGs, and small arms ammunition. A single .50 caliber round striking those explosives would create a much larger explosion than her rifle alone could produce. The shot required perfect precision at a range of over 800 yards, complicated by wind conditions and the stress of knowing her teammates' lives depended on accuracy. Chen controlled her breathing, slowed her heart rate, and squeezed the trigger with the mechanical precision that separated elite snipers from ordinary marksmen. The Barrett rifle bucked against her shoulder as the massive bullet left the barrel at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. 0.8 of a second later, the round struck the ammunition cache with devastating results. The initial explosion was followed immediately by a series of secondary detonations, as mortar rounds and RPG warheads added their destructive power to the blast. The explosion was visible from miles away, a column of smoke and flame that rose hundreds of feet into the mountain air. The machine gun team simply ceased to exist, vaporized in the initial blast wave. But more importantly, The explosion created a wall of smoke and debris that concealed Alpha Team's final approach to the goat trail. Rodriguez led his men into the concealing smoke, using the temporary visual barrier to complete their escape from the canyon floor. The remaining Taliban fighters were disoriented and demoralized, their carefully prepared ambush shattered by a single marksman, operating from an impossible distance. Some continued firing into the smoke, but their shots were random and ineffective. The goat trail was barely wide enough for one person at a time, forcing Alpha Team to move in single file along a path that had been carved into the mountainside by generations of local herders. The trail wound downward through a series of switchbacks, gradually taking the SEALs away from the battlefield and toward the valley floor where helicopter extraction might be possible. Chen remained in her overwatch position despite having expended all ammunition for her rifle. Her job now was to observe and report enemy movements, while Alpha Team made their way to safety. The Taliban fighters were beginning to reorganize, but their assault had been broken by the destruction of their heavy weapons and the loss of so many fighters to the rockslide and ammunition explosion. Santos was weakening rapidly from blood loss, forcing Kim to apply additional pressure dressings to his shoulder wound. The team's movement slowed as Kim worked to stabilize his patient while navigating the narrow mountain trail. Rodriguez made the decision to establish a temporary defensive position while Kim performed more comprehensive medical treatment. Overwatch, Alpha 1. We're setting up a casualty collection point about halfway down the trail. Can you see any pursuit? Chen swept her scope across the canyon, searching for signs of Taliban movement. The enemy fighters appeared to be regrouping near their cave entrances, but none were immediately pursuing Alpha Team down the goat trail. The psychological impact of losing so many fighters to unexpected long-range fire had clearly shaken their confidence. Alpha 1. Overwatch. No immediate pursuit visible. You've got some time to work on your casualties. Kim worked quickly and efficiently to address his teammates' injuries. Santos required immediate intravenous fluids to replace blood loss, while Williams needed further evaluation for potential brain injury from his helmet impact. Thompson's shrapnel wounds were painful but not life-threatening, requiring only cleaning and bandaging to prevent infection. While Kim provided medical care, the other SEALs established security positions along the trail. Martinez and Ramirez moved upward to watch for pursuing Taliban fighters, while Jackson and Thompson descended to secure potential helicopter landing zones. Rodriguez monitored radio communications with their headquarters, coordinating extraction plans and medical support. The weather conditions that had grounded their helicopter support were beginning to improve, with wind speeds decreasing and visibility increasing throughout the valley. Their mission commander reported that medical evacuation helicopters would be airborne within 30 minutes, with fighter aircraft providing close air support to discourage any Taliban interference with the extraction. Chen finally allowed herself to relax slightly, though she maintained her observation duties from the ridge. Her Barrett rifle was empty, but she carried a secondary weapon system, an M24 sniper rifle, chambered in .308 Winchester. The smaller rifle lacked the extreme range capability of the .50 caliber Barrett, but it was perfectly adequate for engaging targets within 600 yards. As she watched Alpha Team's progress down the mountain trail, Chen reflected on the engagement they had just survived. The Taliban ambush had been sophisticated and well executed, utilizing superior numbers, prepared positions, and detailed knowledge of the terrain. Under normal circumstances, an 8-man team caught in such a trap would have suffered catastrophic casualties or complete elimination. But the enemy commanders had made one critical error in their planning. They had failed to account for the possibility of long-range precision fire from an unexpected direction. Chen's position on the ridge had been invisible to ground-based observation, and her ability to deliver accurate fire at extreme distances had disrupted every phase of the Taliban battle plan. The first helicopter appeared on the horizon exactly 30 minutes later. A UH-60 Black Hawk medical evacuation aircraft escorted by two AH-64 Apache attack helicopters. The Apaches immediately began searching for Taliban fighters, their sophisticated sensors and heavy weapons ready to engage any threats to the extraction operation. Rodriguez guided the medical helicopter to a small clearing near the base of the goat trail, using infrared strobes to mark the landing zone in the gathering darkness. The helicopter crew included a flight medic and physician assistant, both experienced in treating combat casualties under field conditions. Santos was the first casualty loaded aboard the helicopter. His condition stabilized, but requiring immediate surgical intervention to repair damage from the Taliban bullet. Williams followed, though his concussion symptoms had improved significantly during the descent from the compound. Thompson's shrapnel wounds were cleaned and bandaged, but he was able to walk to the helicopter under his own power. The remaining 5 SEALs would extract on the second helicopter, which was already approaching from the south. Rodriguez conducted a final headcount and equipment check, ensuring that no sensitive materials or classified equipment had been left behind during their escape from the compound. Chen began her own extraction from the ridge, carefully packing her weapons and equipment for the long movement to an alternate pickup zone. Her position had been compromised by muzzle flashes during the engagement, making it unsafe for helicopter extraction directly from her observation post. Instead, she would need to move several miles to reach a secure landing zone. The movement down from the ridge was treacherous in the darkness, requiring careful navigation across loose rock and steep slopes. Chen moved slowly and deliberately, understanding that a fall or injury now would compromise not only her own safety, but also the helicopter crews who would risk their lives to extract her. As she descended the mountain, Chen's radio crackled with messages from her extracted teammates. Santos was stable and responding well to medical treatment aboard the helicopter. Williams's concussion symptoms were continuing to improve, and Thompson's wounds were relatively minor. All 8 members of Alpha Team would recover fully from their injuries. The second extraction helicopter found Chen at the designated landing zone just as the first hints of dawn began appearing over the eastern mountains. The pilot was the same one who had extracted Alpha Team, and his crew had volunteered to return for Chen despite the additional risk involved in operating so close to known enemy positions. As the helicopter lifted off and began the flight back to their forward operating base, Chen looked down at the canyon where the battle had taken place. Smoke was still rising from the ammunition explosion she had triggered, and scattered equipment marked the locations where Taliban fighters had fallen to her precision fire. The mission had been designated as intelligence gathering, but it had become something much more significant. Alpha Team had survived an elaborate ambush through a combination of exceptional training, tactical skill, and the kind of long-range precision fire that most military professionals considered impossible under combat conditions. Chen's shots had covered distances and achieved accuracy levels that would challenge most snipers under controlled conditions on a firing range. To accomplish the same results under combat stress, while engaging multiple targets across varying ranges and wind conditions, represented marksmanship of the highest possible caliber. But more importantly, her actions had saved the lives of 7 teammates who had trusted her to watch over them from an impossible distance. Each of those men would return to their families because Chen had been willing to risk her own life to provide the covering fire that made their escape possible. The helicopter touched down at their base as the sun cleared the mountain peaks, officially ending one of the most challenging special operations missions any of them had experienced. The debriefing would take hours, and the intelligence gathered during the mission would influence American strategy throughout the region. Rodriguez found Chen in the base's armory, methodically cleaning her weapons despite her obvious exhaustion. The Barrett rifle had performed flawlessly during the engagement, but Chen was taking no chances with equipment that might mean the difference between life and death on future missions. "Hell of a thing you did up there," Rodriguez said quietly, settling into a chair beside her workbench. Chen looked up from her rifle, meeting his eyes with the steady gaze that had made her one of the most respected members of the special operations community. "Just did my job, Chief. Same as always." Rodriguez nodded, understanding that Chen's modesty was genuine. She had never sought recognition or publicity for her achievements, preferring to let her actions speak louder than words. But every SEAL in the community knew about the marksman who had saved Alpha Team with impossible shots from 3 miles away. As Chen returned to cleaning her rifle, Rodriguez reflected on the broader implications of their mission. The Taliban had demonstrated sophisticated tactical capabilities and detailed preparation, but they had been defeated by the exceptional skill and dedication of individual American warriors. It was a reminder that superior technology and numbers could not always overcome the human factors that defined elite military units. The official mission report would describe Alpha Team's successful extraction after contact with enemy forces, but it would not capture the full story of what had transpired in those Afghan mountains. That story would be told and retold in the special operations community, becoming part of the oral tradition that connected current warriors to the heroes who had served before them. Chen finished cleaning her rifle and locked it in her weapons locker, finally allowing herself to acknowledge the exhaustion that had been building throughout the long mission. But before heading to her quarters for some well-deserved rest, she took a moment to visit the base medical facility where her teammates were recovering from their injuries. Santos was sleeping peacefully, his shoulder wound properly treated and his blood volume restored through intravenous fluids. Williams was awake and alert, showing no lasting effects from his concussion. Thompson was arguing with the medical staff about returning to duty despite his shrapnel wounds, demonstrating the stubborn toughness that made him an ideal demolitions expert. Each man was alive because Chen had been willing to remain in position under enemy fire, delivering precision shots at distances that challenged the limits of both her equipment and her skills. Their survival was testament to the power of training, dedication, and the unbreakable bonds that connected members of the special operations community. As Chen finally headed toward her quarters, she carried with her the satisfaction that came from knowing she had lived up to the trust her teammates had placed in her. Tomorrow would bring new missions and new challenges, but tonight 8 American warriors would sleep safely because one marksman had refused to abandon her post when her comrades needed her most.